Chapter 2. The Severed Path. Dawn didn't break in the wastes, so much as it bled across the horizon. There was no gentle transition from night to day, only a bruised, sickly violet light that seemed to ooze from the cracked earth rather than descend from the sky. I woke to the taste of copper still lingering in my mouth, the lingering aftertaste of the holy hangover. I sat up, my joints popping with a stiffness that felt ancient. Kaelen was already awake, hunched over the fire pit, meticulously cleaning his blade. The mundane, rhythmic scrape of steel on leather was the only thing grounding me to the reality I had once known. It was an anchor, but my mind was already pulling away, drifting toward the abyssal commands etched into my subconscious. "You slept for 3 hours," Kaelen said without looking up. His voice was neutral, but his posture was tense, the coiled spring of a man who realized his traveling companion was no longer entirely human. "It was enough," I replied, my voice raspy. I reached for my pack, my fingers grazing the Chronicle of Oaths. The leather felt warm, almost pulsing. "Do not touch it yet, Torin," the entity murmured, a soft, velvet warning that sent a shiver down my spine. "We need to reach the gates of the abandoned archive before the true work begins." "Elara is scouting ahead," Kaelen continued, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes were tired, shadowed by deep circles. "She says the path toward the archive of the Unspoken is blocked by a rock slide. We'll have to climb the ridge." "We will do whatever is necessary to reach it," I said. My tone was too clipped, too precise. I felt the entity's approval, a cold, sickening rush of dopamine that made my head spin. I fought to keep my expression placid, to remain the Torin Valerius who took pride in the order of ledgers and the sanctity of the archive. But even as I tried to organize my thoughts, I felt them slipping, replaced by a cold, mathematical detachment. We gathered our gear in silence. The wastes were indifferent to our presence. Here, reality felt thin, like parchment stretched too tight. Every time I stepped, I felt the ground beneath my boots shift, as if the landscape itself were a temporary illusion, waiting for a command to reshape into something else. As we climbed the ridge, the physical exertion began to tear at my resolve. My muscles burned, and my lungs felt as though they were filled with crushed glass. It was the legacy of the previous night's divine intervention. The entity had taken what it wanted from my body and left the husk behind to pay the debt. "Look at them," the voice whispered, referring to Kaelen and Elara as they struggled up the steep incline ahead of me. "They are so small, so bound by the laws of physics, of gravity, of fatigue. They don't understand that they are merely observers in a performance of inevitable decay." "Torin, grab my hand," Kaelen called out, extending an arm as a section of the ridge crumbled beneath my boot. I took his hand. It was solid, warm, and real. For a second, the contact acted as a circuit breaker, severing the link to the entity. I felt a wave of genuine, crushing guilt. I was leading them into the heart of a chaotic storm, and I knew, with a terrifying clarity, that they were the most fragile things I had ever sworn to protect. "I've got you," Kaelen said, pulling me onto the ledge. He didn't let go immediately, his grip lingering on my forearm. "Torin, look at me. If you're not capable of continuing, we turn back. I don't care about the gate. I don't care about the truth. I care about you." I wanted to weep. I wanted to tell him that I was already gone, that the Torin Valerius he knew was merely a memory being slowly overwritten by something vast and uncaring. "I am fine, Kaelen," I said, pulling away. "I'm just tired." "Lie," the entity hissed. "Lies are the lubricant of the machine. Keep them moving. The archive is waiting. We crested the ridge, and the landscape below unfolded in a display of impossible geography. The archive of the Unspoken stood in the center of a crater, its spires twisted into impossible angles, defiance of all architectural laws. It wasn't built. It looked as if it had been grown, a crystalline fungus blooming from the earth. I stopped, my breath hitching. The smell hit me then, not of parchment or wax, but of something ancient and metallic, like blood mixed with ozone. It was the scent of a power that had been sleeping for eons. "That's the place?" Elara asked, appearing from behind a jagged rock, her daggers drawn. "It looks wrong." "It's not wrong," I whispered, and I felt the entity pushing against my larynx, forcing the words out. "It's honest." We descended into the crater, the silence of the valley ringing in our ears like a physical weight. Every step felt like a violation. I could feel the entity waking up, its presence expanding like a dark stain across my consciousness. The dissonance began. The world around me started to flicker, the shadows stretching into long, reaching claws. I felt myself losing the tether to my own body. "We are the architects of this place," the entity declared, its voice now drowning out my own internal monologue. "We are the ones who will write the final entry in the chronicle." I stumbled, my vision tunneling. The chronicle of oaths in my pack seemed to radiate heat, searing my back. I couldn't distinguish between my own intent and the divine directive. It was all a frantic, overwhelming surge of cold fire. I felt my hand reaching for the book, my fingers tracing the dragon-hide binding, the texture feeling like cold, dead skin. "Torin!" Kaelen shouted, but his voice sounded miles away, distorted by the rushing wind that only I could hear. I fell to my knees, the ground beneath me liquefying into a swirling, violet abyss. I wasn't in the wastes anymore. I was in a cathedral of memories, a place where the history of the world was written in fading ink. I felt the entity reach through me, its hand, my hand, glowing with a sickly, iridescent light. It was preparing to unlock the archive. "The doors are not locked by steel, Torin," it whispered, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. "They are locked by the belief that the past matters. Let us show them that the past is nothing more than fuel." The pain returned, sharper than before. It was the holy hangover preparing for its arrival, a preemptive strike of lethargy that turned my limbs to lead. I tried to scream, to warn Kaelen to run, to tell him that I was about to unleash a fire that would consume us all. But my tongue felt like a dry, heavy stone. I was the chief horologist of a dying city. I was the architect of my own ruin. And as I raised my hand toward the twisted spires of the archive, I realized that the silence I had built my life around was finally, truly, over. The light emanating from my palm wasn't white or gold. It was a hungry, bruised purple that seemed to eat the very air around it. I watched, a passenger in my own skin, as my fingers moved with a terrifying, jerky precision to trace a sigil into the air, a shape I didn't recognize, yet felt etched into my very soul. "Torin, get away from it!" Kaelen's voice was a desperate roar. Closer now. He was running toward me, his boots kicking up dust that swirled in the violet light like tiny dying stars. "Here's a variable," the entity purred, "an unnecessary piece of friction. Remove him." "No!" I choked out, the word a physical struggle against the entity's iron grip on my vocal cords. He is not! He is nothing," the voice snapped. The sudden spike of power surged from my chest, flowing down my arm and erupting from my hand like a geyser of liquid shadow. It didn't strike Kaelen directly. Instead, it lashed out at the ground before him, turning the solid earth into a chaotic, shifting slurry of mud and glass. Kaelen skidded to a halt, stumbling as the terrain beneath him groaned and buckled. The effort of diverting the blast was agonizing. My vision blurred, and the holy hangover hit me with the force of a falling mountain. My knees buckled, and I slammed into the mud, my face buried in the cold, wet reality of the crater. The purple light in my hand flickered and died, leaving me in a darkness so absolute it felt like being blinded. For a moment, there was only the sound of my own ragged, wet breathing and the distant, confused shouting of Kaelen and Elara. Then the silence of the wastes rushed back in, heavy and oppressive. I lay there for a long time, the mud soaking through my leathers, chilling me to the bone. My muscles were screaming, each fibre vibrating with the aftermath of the deity's intrusion. I felt small. I felt like a discarded shell, a piece of clockwork that had been wound too tight and finally snapped. "Torin!" Elara's voice was near now, sharp and cautious. I could hear the subtle click of her blade being sheathed. She was afraid, but she was a predator, and she was watching me with a cold, analytical eye. "What in the hells did you just do?" I pushed myself up, my hands sliding in the muck. My head swam with a nauseating vertigo, and my ears were ringing with a high, sustained pitch that seemed to be the echo of the void itself. I looked up at the archive. It was still there, twisted and defiant, but the air around it felt less tense, as if the building itself were breathing a sigh of relief at my failure. "I tried to open it," I said, my voice sounding hollow. I reached into my bag and pulled out the Chronicle of Oaths. The book was cold now, its dragon hide cover lifeless. I couldn't understand how I had ever thought it was warm. I tried to force the lock, but it didn't want to open. Kaelen helped me to my feet, his grip firm but hesitant. He smelled of sweat and fear, a scent so deeply, painfully human, that I felt an overwhelming urge to collapse into his arms and confess everything, the voices, the hunger, the way the stars were shifting. But I stayed silent, my pride, or perhaps the entity's lingering influence, keeping the wall between us intact. "We shouldn't be here," Kaelen said, his gaze flicking nervously toward the twisted spires of the archive. "Whatever this place is, it's not meant for the living. We need to leave, Torin. We need to go back to the ridge and find another path." "Back?" The entity's voice was a low, mocking chuckle in the depths of my mind. "There is no back, Torin. There is only the collapse of the sequence." "We cannot turn back," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the way my hands were still shaking. "We've come too far to stop now. The answer isn't behind us, Kaelen. It's in there." I gestured toward the archive, even though, in my heart, I knew that in there held nothing but the erasure of everything I cared about. Elara moved past us, her eyes fixed on the entrance of the archive. "If we're going in, we do it quickly. The shadows are stretching again, and the ground, it's starting to groan." She was right. The ground beneath us was vibrating, with a low, sub-audible rumble, the sound of a vast mechanism grinding into motion. The archive wasn't just a building, it was part of a larger, forgotten machine, and by my clumsy attempt at entry, I had triggered its awakening. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to summon the logic and precision of the high cleric I used to be. But the memories were becoming harder to access, like trying to recall a dream after the sun had risen. I looked at Kaelen, his face a mask of determined, fearful loyalty, and I realized that I wasn't leading them on a quest for the truth anymore. I was leading them into the center of a trap I had helped build, one heartbeat at a time. As we walked toward the entrance, the air began to thicken, heavy with the metallic tang of ozone. The holy hangover was receding, replaced by a cold, sharp, and terrifying anticipation. I was Torin Valerius, and I was about to find out exactly what happened when the clockwork of the world finally stopped.